Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your two analog synths of anodyne certitudes. That one felt like a reach.
It's not bad, though.
Okay.
Sir Dukes of Details. That's what it should have been.
Oh, that was a good one. That's a good one. Can you punch that for me later?
Yeah, I'll punch that for you.
All right, thanks. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh.
And Jordan, today we're talking about one of the highest artistic achievements of the 70s, a towering musical monument to creative drive and joyful self-expression. That's right, we're talking about Xanadu again. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, what we're doing is wrapping up Mummuary by talking about Hammer's 1971 masterpiece, Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. No, I'm just kidding again.
I love how much you committed to Mummuary. I never thought that joke would live on past the Mummy episode, but wow, it's just in our third.
It's the last week of Mummuary.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
No, I'm just kidding. We're talking about Stevie Wonder's undisputed masterpiece, Songs in the Key of Life. The high watermark of Wonder's classic period, which includes Music of My Mind and Talking Book in 1972, Intervisions in 1973, Fulfillingness's First Finale in 1974. I think the last three of those won Album of the Year. And then Songs in the Key of Life came out in 76 and then won the Grammy of the Year. So this caps off that run where he was just like the Beatles and Creedence rolled into one. He was releasing new towering artistic achievements and pushing the form forward at a pace that would be the envy of your local tweaker. It is funny, like going back and thinking about him in context. I'm like, he had an imperial phase. That 70s stretch is insane. And I'd forgotten, I knew they did well commercially and everything, but I'd forgotten that they also won like 3 back-to-back. The only year that he didn't win a Grammy was the year that he was ineligible because he was making songs in the key that would then win the Grammy. It's really wild.
And didn't Paul Simon win that year? And he went out of his way to thank Stevie Wonder in his acceptance speech for not releasing an album that year.
I didn't know that, but that's amazing.
That's true.
Yeah. I don't know how. Yeah, it boggles my mind, man. I mean, it's like, it's funny because like you think about this. There's other periods. I made the Creedence comparison because didn't they put out like 3 records in a year at one point?
Oh, I was trying to figure out where you were going with that. I was like,
yeah.
Made a lot of bad business deals and lost his songs?
Yeah.
Fought with his brother? Okay.
No, and then the classic other one is Miles Davis made like 5 records in a week at one point when he was on Prestige. He was like
But that's jazz.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, like you just go in and count off a bunch of standards that you played the previous night. And then, in 6 hours you get an album. But just the stuff that Stevie was doing with the synths and 130 people per record. Anyway, put the cart ahead of the horse. Songs in the Key of Life ended up being Wonder's defining musical statement, the summary of the last decade and change of his life. Stevie took his life experiences and put them all into Songs in the Key of Life. Motown founder Berry Gordy reflected in a 1997 documentary for the Classic Albums series, and it worked. And boy, howdy did it.
I mean, yeah, what the hell can I possibly say about Songs in the Key of Life that not only hasn't already been said in a much more eloquent, better way by you, but by many other people as well? I mean, trying to sum it up on a podcast intro, it's embarrassing, frankly. It's like trying to do a thumbnail sketch of Guernica or like making the elevator pitch for The Godfather or something. I mean, it's one of the most perfect pieces of music of the 20th century. The scale and scope of it is matched by the musical precision and virtuosity that it took to make it. Every track is its own little musical universe.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about that on the Revolver episode, how every song is just sonically so different from one another. I think it's through with this 10 years later on Songs in the Key of Life. Usually double albums for me can get a little tedious, but no filler, all killer, no notes. And also, I mean, the thing that really stuck out to me listening back in anticipation of this episode was just how much joy is in that album.
That's the number one word that I think of when I think of Stevie Wonder, man. I mean, not that he doesn't, and his explicit statement on this one was writing about the bad parts of life as well as all the good ones. But, it is just just such unfettered joy. I mean, he's happy to be alive. He's happy to be as creative as he is. He's happy to be making
father.
music. He's happy to be a father. And it just all comes through. And it's still so vibrant. And it doesn't feel forced. I mean, it doesn't feel like a we're partying record or like we're like a hedonistic kind of thing. It just... There's just a zest for life that oozes from every note of this record. And it's beautiful.
I mean, Sir Duke, is there a better song about loving music?
I don't know. I
can't think of one.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's the song about him falling in love with music and all the people who made that possible for him. I can't think of a song that,
and as
that equals
polished and as polished and labored over as this stuff is. There's so many great little off the cuff moments in there that just it's
just, not a Steely Dan record.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Not Tusk.
It just when he in Sir Duke right before the one big shout chorus, when he goes yeah. It's like, yeah, you are having that much fun. Or I forget the one song where he goes, he's like, and now there's a saxophone, like right before the sax solo. I'm just like, yeah, man, you are really just having a ball, and it is just such a wonderful ride to be along with on on. See, it's rendered me inarticulate.
I mean, it reminds me of, I know this isn't on Songs in the Key of Life, but one of my favorite Stevie moments in his entire song history is on Do I Do from Original Musicarium, the full like 10-minute long version or something, where he just announces Dizzy Gillespie, like, ladies and gentlemen, I have the privilege to welcome on my album. And it's like you could hear how thrilled he is that he got Dizzy to play on one of his songs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, it would be somebody that would be name checked in Sir Duke.
Yeah.
I just love how much he obviously continued to love music in general, but especially the people that made him want to make it as a kid. Yeah, and that comes through so much on this album. Yeah, and like you said, there's nothing cliche about it. There's no platitudes. I mean, so many songs that, I mean, it's become a whole bad genre of music of like the songs that people write when they become parents for their kids that are kind of like treacly. I have to say, I think like Beautiful Boy by John Lennon's like the one I think that like gets a pass for me, mostly because it just makes me cry. But like, yeah, there's just the exuberance is just all over this album. It's so good. Just talking about the whole Imperial phase, that incredible run. How would you rank those records? I'm curious.
I mean, I'd have to look at them. I'd have to look at all the track
lists.
Yeah, because I'm not, it's kind of embarrassing, but like I didn't really get into Stevie until later in life. Like I just kind of knew all the hits, right? And then I didn't realize that like this was never like it was never contextualized for me. Like someone was like, oh, by the way, he made all this stuff in like 5 years. Like by himself. He played every instrument on this. It was just you grow up with like seeing him on Sesame Street or whatever. You're like, oh, that whips. That's awesome. And then like only later you learn that he's like one of the towering geniuses of the 20th century. And his whole phase is from being like kind of the wonderkind in Motown into being this very, self-directed, very confident, just machine. I think it might be this is number one for me. It really is. Yeah. And then maybe Fulfillingness and then Inner Visions.
Don't sleep on Music of My Mind. That first side of Music of My Mind is really good.
There's just so much. Like you said, and everything is a world unto itself. Well, from the wild negotiations with Motown that preceded the album, to the equally wild parade of guest stars and almost guest stars on the record, to the cutting-edge keyboard technology that Wonder utilized on it, to the even more mind-boggling work habits that Stevie kept during the creation, here's everything you didn't know about Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life. Stevie Wonder's story is inextricable from that of Motown. He had been under contract to Gordy's groundbreaking record label since he was just 11 years old.
There's a great story about Stevie as a little kid when, I think this was before he was even signed to Motown, where he went up to one of the non-Smokey Robinson miracles, a guy named Ronnie White, and said, I can sing better than Smokey. Love the chutzpah.
Yeah, and he hung around with all the Funk Brothers and everybody. He basically learned how to play drums from Benny Benjamin and picked up, his, because those guys were all jazz cats, right? And really serious jazz players. And so a lot of Stevie's harmonic sophistication, the substitutions and tricks that he pulls on keyboard and songwriting come from just kind of studying and absorbing what those guys had to show him. I think it's in the Standing in the Shadows of Motown documentary where they talk about like, oh yeah, Stevie just like came in and just absorbed everything.
I just want to reflect on the fact that the Motown rhythm section, the drummer was Benny Benjamin and the bass player was James Jamerson.
Surely that wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
But by the 1970s, Stevie was experiencing a quarter-life crisis. He began openly discussing quitting the music industry altogether and moving to Ghana, where he believed his ancestral lineage could be traced to, and where he planned to devote his resources to assisting handicapped children and other humanitarian causes. Like Marvin Gaye, about 5 years earlier, Wonder had begun chafing under Motown Berry Gordy's strict image policies and had started doing things like replacing the standard issue sort of mod suits that they made all their acts wear with brightly colored dashiki tunics and braids. Wonder had spoken publicly about his fascination with Ghana as recently as 1973 in an interview with Rolling Stone, and by 1975, he was talking about doing a farewell tour with all the proceeds earmarked for Ghanaian charities. He told the Associated Press around this time, "I've heard of great needs in that part of the world, the African countries. I believe that you have to give unselfishly. You can sing about things and talk about things, but if your actions don't speak louder than your words, you're nothing." All that said, though, there were rumblings that this was all just some clever public maneuvering timed to his upcoming contract renegotiations with Motown. Which, to be honest, he didn't really need the leverage. Motown had lost the Four Tops, Gladys Knights, the Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye and Diana Ross were on their way out, and Berry Gordy would have been well aware that Wonder's epic run through the first half of the 70s had basically underwritten everything Motown had done at that point, including his disastrous forays into Hollywood. And so while Wonder was also talking about the follow-up to Fulfilling This' first finale, God, that's a tongue tire.
I know.
He, in an interview with NME, New Musical Express, he was saying that it wouldn't be out before his contract with Motown was up. "I might wait a long time, maybe more than a year, before I release another album," he told them. So all of this public maneuvering had Berry Gordy sweating, and that was probably the point of it.
And not to totally derail this, but there was also a cataclysmic event that occurred in Stevie's life in August 1973, one that nearly killed him. He was traveling on a foggy highway in North Carolina on his way to a radio benefit concert when his car rear-ended a logging truck in front of him. And there's multiple versions of this, but the most dramatic one is that one of the logs in the truck came loose and smashed through the windshield of the car and struck Stevie in the head, which left him in a coma for several days.
He got Final Destinationed.
Yeah, seriously. Like, there's the other version is that it was almost like a James Mansfield situation where just the front of the car went under like the flatbed of the truck.
Oh,
Either way,
God.
not good. He wound up in a coma, and he was hospitalized for 2 weeks, including a week in intensive care. And when he gave his first interview, when he came out of it, he said he didn't really remember much of the crash itself. I think he was like asleep in the passenger seat, listening to music through headphones or something. But he said his period in a coma had a really profound effect on him. He said, "The only thing I know is that I was unconscious. And for a few days, I was definitely in a much better spiritual place that made me aware of a lot of things that concern my life and my future. And what I have to do is reach another higher ground." And he later elaborated to Crawl Daddy magazine, saying that he felt like he had a second chance at life following this accident. He said, "What happened to me was a very, very critical thing, and I was really supposed to die." And this is something that he didn't really speak much about after, but he carried it with him the rest of his life. I guess some people close to him suggested plastic surgery to try to remove the mark left by, from the accident. And he said, no, he said, "I'll leave it as one of the scars of life that I went through." So it was something that he kind of wore as a badge of honor in a funny way, or something that he wanted to keep close to him. And a lot of those close to Stevie noticed a profound change in him after this accident. The then Motown president, Ewart Abner, I think is how you say that, told the New Yorker in 1995, Stevie was already on the path, and his music told you that, but the accident heightened and escalated his reaching who he is. There was a calmness that set in after that. I don't think I've ever seen him get truly agitated or upset to the point of becoming immobilized. I've seen him impatient, excited, and anxious, but after the accident, there was a maturity that was unusual for his age. And obviously, the Fulfilling This First Finale album was the next one that he released after the accident, but I'd say that Songs in the Key of Life is the album that really bore the effects of this psychological, spiritual shift.
So all this was the backdrop to which Wonder and his high-powered attorney, Johannin Vigoda, right?
Yeah.
Not Abe Vigoda?
I know. I wonder if they're
That'd be a
related.
bummer.
I could see Abe Vigoda being a hell of a negotiator, too.
Yeah. This was the backdrop to which Stevie and his lawyer went to negotiate with Ewart Abner and Berry Gordy, who was then chairman of the board of Motown. Gordy described the negotiations in his memoirs as the most grueling and nerve-wracking we ever had. Ultimately, Stevie Wonder walked away with a 7-year contract that promised him a $13 million advance with the opportunity to garner up to $37 million if he delivered more than his album per year minimum, 20% royalty rate, and control of his publishing. At the time, this was the biggest deal that had ever been done in the music industry, period. Time magazine contextualized it by saying that it was more than Elton John and Neil Diamond's contracts combined. I had to do it because there was no way I was going to lose Stevie, Gordy said in the 1997 Classic Albums documentary. I was shaking in my boots.
Berry Gordy whining about how much stuff costs is my favorite Berry Gordy moment. Yeah, I mean, in the same interview, he literally wails, $13 million was a lot of money. And Stevie's so smug. In the same documentary, he says with just uncontained glee, Berry was brave enough to take the chance, to take the challenge and say, you know what? I believe in him, Stevie, enough to do this. I believe in the gamble. And he was a smart man. He chuckles a little bit as he says it.
Also in this contract, Stevie had the creative freedom to work anywhere he wanted, with any artist he wanted to, so he could produce outside of Motown. He had veto power over any potential singles. He was upset that there was going to be a triple disc greatest hits album that was going to be coming out that didn't feature songs from his 70s run, so they canceled that at his behest and sent all 200,000 copies they'd already pressed of it to the incinerator. And lastly, and most remarkably, if Motown was ever to be sold in the future, the deal would require Stevie Wonder's permission. That's insane.
The Beatles, Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, none of them had that kind of influence over their own label. I mean, granted, I think they still were hanging on to the last illusions that this was a family-run business at that time. So maybe it's not quite on par of like Capitol or EMI being sold or something like that. But still, that's nuts. And then when Motown was ultimately sold to MCA in 1988, Stevie, he didn't stand in the way, but he made it very clear that he would have preferred Motown to remain a black-owned business and made a soapbox moment of it.
And so Stevie's non-studio activities were decidedly reflective of his widening worldview and growing maturity. In June of 1975, he performed in San Francisco at a benefit for the National Newspaper Publishers Scholarship Fund. Then in August at the one-to-one concert at Madison Square Garden to benefit mentally handicapped children. Wonder would donate $10,000 personally to that cause. And the evening's encore from that concert, in which Stevie, John Lennon, and Roberta Flack jam on Give Peace a Chance, would later appear on a John Lennon record called Shaved Fist. Shaved Fish. Sounds gross and weird.
Yeah, it sounds vaguely obscene. My favorite Stevie Wonder John Lennon anecdote took place in 1974 when Stevie was part of a jam session that is widely believed to be the last time that John Lennon and Paul McCartney were together in a recording studio. And the lineup for this was insane. It was John and Paul, Stevie Wonder, Harry Nilsson, Rolling Stones sax player Bobby Keys, session guitarist Jesse Ed Davis. And despite this blinding wattage of star power, the results were a drugged out, shambolic mess. You can hear them online on a bootleg called A Toot and a Snort, or A Toot and a Snore in 74. And it's so named because of a comment that John makes about cocaine that's being passed around during these sessions. And it's, it's pretty shockingly bad. Considering, I mean, the only part that's like kind of cool because it's sort of sad is that John and Paul do this it sounds like they're drunk doing karaoke, really. But they do a version of Stand By Me, and they duet together, and it's just really touching to hear those voices, that sweet and sour blend one last time doing something like Stand By Me, which is, I mean, it's almost a cliche. I mean, doing a song like that, these two old friends, and the roughness kind of adds to it. That part's sweet.
No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me.
Yeah, there's a lot of not great moments on there, but Stevie's there, underutilized.
Yeah, but Stevie was there. Stevie also played the mostly black Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he established a fund to keep the school from closing. He gave $40,000 to a Jamaican home for blind and mentally disabled children that would bear his name. He linked up with the Reverend Jesse Jackson at a Push for Equality concert in Memphis, and he had lunch with the Black Congressional Congress. But amid all of this globe-trotting and high-profile public performance, there was little news of the first record on this new insane contract. And the music press, industry people began questioning what exactly was going on in Wonder's camp. The answer was chaos, which was more or less business as usual for Stevie Wonder. Michael Cimbella, the lead guitarist in Stevie's backing band Wonder Love, who would go on to write Maniac from the Flashdance soundtrack, told Mark Grabowski for Mark's Stevie biography, Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, The Soulful Journey of Stevie Wonder, we called what was happening running up a wall, because we'd start to go and wind up where we started. Stevie would hire people. Basically, he hired his whole family. There was his brother, who's been studying to be an accountant for like 30 years. I love Calvin, but oh my God, he'd give jobs to all of his relatives. A cousin or a nephew or a cousin of a nephew, guys with no experience, and they'd piss everybody off. Stevie, he's such a child, such a beautiful human being, but it was so sad. You couldn't get anything done. You'd go weeks, months, and you wouldn't hear from him. Then out of the blue, he'd call at 4 a.m., because Stevie never sleeps, and he'd want to record something. Or he'd tell you to get to the airport in an hour for a trip to wherever it had been decided he was going. It was crazy. Time magazine, in a profile from around this time, wrote, "Life with Stevie is a circus of indecision, chaotic scheduling, and the totally unexpected." They quoted a friend as saying, "It's not that he's a prima donna or purposefully rude. He just doesn't have days or nights, and he's seldom thinking more than 10 minutes ahead."
We'll talk more about this later, but there's a New Yorker profile on Stevie from 1995 that had this amazing insight into his sleep pattern. This indifference to the passage of time is frequently traced to his blindness. Wonder is inclined to be a little looser, sleeping when he is tired, which may be in hours or half hours snatched in planes or limos. Or he may drop off during an interview for Italian television, as a Motown publicist told me he did in 1991. Time is altogether another type of trip for him, Sarita Wright, his ex-wife, said. So yeah, remember this as we talk about his punishing workload and insane schedule.
Michael Cimbella has a great story about auditioning for Stevie Wonder's band. He said, at the end of the 1960s, there was still this whole segregation thing between blacks and whites. There's a great interview about this album, or oral history of this album, for a site called OK Player. Really in depth, has a lot of stuff.
Chris Williams, yeah.
A lot of details I hadn't seen before. Most Motown bands didn't have more than one white player in their band. Stevie already had a white trumpet player, and there was an argument going on in the corner of the studio. Ira Tucker, who was the publicist, told Stevie, "Look, you don't realize you hired a white guy." So Stevie motioned me to come over to him, and he said, "Hey man, what's your sign?" I didn't know what he meant, so I thought he was asking me what my nationality was, so I answered him, "I'm Italian." Stevie turned around and said, "Guys, he's Italian. He's not white. He's in the band." Also in that article, like, drummer Raymond Pounds recalled going to Stevie's house to audition, and Stevie greeting him by going, "If you don't play good, we're going to kick your ass."
Stevie is funny. And he does
Yeah.
these really good impressions of people. You see it in interviews and documentaries with him. His like generic white dude voice is Eddie Murphy level. It's so funny. It's so good. And I think this was in the New Yorker piece. A blind fan with a white cane came up to him to get his picture taken with him. And Stevie said, "Quick, take the picture before I steal his stick." It's just like he has like a real irreverent side. And I'm working on a podcast right now, I think I'm allowed to say, about the Rolling Stones 1972 tour of the United States, where Stevie Wonder was the opening act. And he used to memorize the floor plans of the hotels where they were staying and then walk around by himself in order to trick people into thinking he could see. And Lionel Richie, he tells this great story of a night when he went to visit Stevie at his house. And Stevie told him that he had a song that he wanted him to hear on cassette. And Stevie was like, "Let's go out to the car." So they go to the car, and Stevie gets in on the driver's side. And then, to Lionel's horror, puts the car in reverse and starts to back down the driveway. And they go a little ways before Stevie's like, "Gotcha." Yeah, so Stevie loves messing with people. Lionel said that he greets him every time he sees Stevie and Stevie says, "Good to see you."
So parts of songs in the Key of Life had been in place as early as 1974. There's a really amazing performance by Wonder and parts of Wonder Love. Michael Sembello's in there on the German TV show Musikladen. And they play Contusion. They play the really bruising fusion track. It's jazz fusion, and they talked about. Someone talks about like, that was Stevie's being like being interested by stuff that like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock were doing, and just basically wanting to write a song that was like, "Oh yeah, I'm not just like a singer, I also shred." So that track had been in place as early as 1974.
Doesn't contusion mean bruising?
It does. Yeah. A little wordplay for you.
That's good.
Yeah. And he was talking about the follow-up to Fulfillingness's first finale, which he titled, predictably, Fulfillingness's second finale, to writers from Crawdaddy and Melody Maker in 1970 as well. But they were dark songs. One was influenced by the televised police ambush of the Symbionese Liberation Army, who is a far-left revolutionary group then on the run with heiress Patricia Hearst, who they had kidnapped and possibly brainwashed, and which many members of the organization were killed in that ambush.
Yeah, that song was called The Future, which featured a cautionary line, "Don't look at the world like a stranger, because you know we're living in danger." And there was also another song for that proposed album called Living Off the Love of the Land, which contained lyrics like, "Seems the wisdom of man hasn't got much wiser. Seems to me that fools are even more foolish." Bummer.
And perhaps wary of alienating his audience with such downer material, Wonder decided to scrap the songs and start fresh with a new concept. He initially titled it, Let's See Life the Way It Is. But the final title, Songs in the Key of Life, came to him in a dream.
I'm not over the fact that there's a missing Stevie Wonder album from his Imperial phase, not to mention the 200 plus outtakes from Songs in the Key of Life. So,
And later in the 70s, the two instrumental records he cut with the Meters.
Right. And did he do an album with Jeff Beck? Because I know there was an unreleased album with Jeff Beck on Motown. One of my favorite things are like long lost albums, like shelved album. I did an article on like the most mysterious unreleased albums for Rolling Stone a long time ago. And I know that there was a Jeff Beck Motown album.
I didn't know that. I mean, I know the story about Superstition, which is that they wrote it together and then
Stevie was like, "No, actually,
yeah.
This is good."
Yeah. Jeff Beck made a record for Motown in 1970.
Right. And it's still shelved, right?
Yeah.
I don't think, maybe there'll be like a Salinger thing where it will come out now that he has passed.
Oh, it was James. What? That is wild.
Yeah, no, it's like, was it Jamerson on bass?
Yeah, James Jamerson on bass, Earl Van Dyke on keyboards.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was no joke. Like, I would do anything to hear that.
Yeah, that's wild. The title, Songs in the Key of Life, reflected Stevie's desire to address a broader range of material. I challenged myself to write as many different things as I could, to cover as many topics as I could, in dealing with the title and representing what it was about, he says in the Classic Albums documentary.
That's what we do on this show.
The title would give me a challenge, but equally important as a challenge, it would give me an opportunity to express my feelings as a songwriter and an artist. And right he did. John Fishbach, who co-engineered the majority of these sessions with Gary's name at that point was Gary Olazabal. I believe he has changed it. He's now going by Gary Adante, but it makes citing him very confusing.
Why did he change it?
I don't know. He's just named his...
So that people on podcasts can have an easier time saying it?
Maybe, yeah. No, in that OK Player thing, he's named Gary Adante, and it took me a while to find that he was the same Gary who was previously Gary Olazabal.
Well, I don't know if you know this. There are actually only, I think, 6 Garys in the world.
It went on for 2 years almost every day. Many hours and huge amounts of material. John Fishbach, who co-engineered the majority of the sessions with Gary Olazabal Andante, told Sound on Sound. I guess it was really his most prolific time. He did more songs in those 2 years than I think he had done before.
Yeah, the whole MO of Songs in the Key of Life can be found in the opening track, Love's in Need of Love Today, which kind of served as like a musical mission statement. Stevie told Mark Myers, the author of Anatomy of a Song, the concept I had in mind was that for love to be effective, it has to be fed. Love by itself is hollow. It's an interesting sentiment. He came up with the initial concept for the song on a cold day in 1974 when he was staying at a hotel in New York City with Yolanda Simmons, who was pregnant with her daughter Aisha, who would be immortalized on Isn't She Lovely, which we'll get to later. And then he started writing the song and got bits of it down on a tape recorder. He said, I just play and songs sort of happen. Like a painter, I get my inspiration from experiences that can be painful or beautiful. I always start from a feeling of profound gratitude. You know, only by the grace of God am I here, and right from there. That's good advice. I think most songwriters are inspired by an inner voice and spirit. God gave me this gift, and this particular song was a message I was supposed to deliver. And the intro to the song, you know, good morning or evening, friends. Here's your friendly announcer. I have serious news to pass on to everybody. That came from a memory that Stevie had of the church radio programs he used to listen to when he was a child. And an announcer would come on and say, good morning or good evening, everyone in Radio Land. I want to give you a message. And, you know, that was the whole deal. Stevie said, my inspiration for that song was the gospel quartets of the 1950s, like the one Sam Cooke was in. When I sang my final vocal on top of that song, I imagined Sam in the studio with me, his spirit and energy. I wonder if they played together. They might have. Sam Cooke was shot in December 64.
Yeah, that's a question for Peter Guralnick.
Yeah.
Actually, hold on. I have that biography. They played together at Blues Under the Stars, which was a concert at Wrigley Field in Chicago that had like Marvin Gaye and Muddy Waters, Buddy Guy, Etta James, and Sam. So they would have crossed paths. There you have it. Thank you, Peter Guralnick, for all that you do. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages. What the hell were we talking about? Oh, okay. Though the exact count is unknown, Wonder claims to have recorded several hundred tracks during the Songs in the Key of Life sessions, which is nuts. Nearly all of which remain in the vaults. That Prince-like figure is corroborated by Fishbach, who puts the number at something like 200 songs in various stages of completion. Some would be sketched out, some are more finished than others, and we just kept working until we had what he wanted.
And on top of the songs that we mentioned earlier from the Fulfilling Us second finale project, not much is really known about these unreleased songs. In May 2014, a snippet of a previously unheard track called So Much in Love surfaced on the internet just in time for Stevie's 64th birthday. And when discussing just this incredible volume of unissued Songs in the Key of Life material in that classic albums documentary, Stevie, he couldn't resist a mischievous hee-hee when discussing them, giving hope to fans that, you know, he'll hopefully have some kind of master plan for these lost gems from his golden era.
Gary Adante told Sound on Sound that Wonder is frighteningly spontaneous. When he starts writing a song, he can hear its entire production as a finished piece in his head. Obviously, this changes as the song develops, but in his mind, he hears the finished master. Initially, sitting at the keyboard, he doesn't have a lyric, so he might come up with a hook or an idea for a chorus, and everything will flow from there. Rob Arbidier, a keyboard player who started working with Stevie as a programmer in 1985, added, Stevie has a better grasp of what he's trying to accomplish than anyone else I've ever worked with. And while he might not always express it in a real obvious, logical way, he knows when he hears through his ears what he's hearing in his mind, and he knows how to steer something towards what it wants to be. Fishbach told Tape Op magazine certain things he'd lay on tape in a particular order that didn't make any sense to me. He'd already hear it as a complete song. He'd lay strange harmonies and you'd be like, I don't know, and he'd tell you to shut up. He had it sketched out in his head and to just wait. Doubling vocals were pretty much useless because he could double a vocal so perfectly you couldn't even tell it was there. That's insane. As far as being a studio professional, I've never worked with anyone as in their element as Stevie. There are lots of bands that are great, they play great, sing great, but you get them in the studio and they're kind of lost. They don't know how to work the mic. Stevie just has all the nuances down. He knows how to control everything in the studio. He is a brilliant man.
Well, his ears, there's that famous story, and I feel like we talked about it on here, but I can't remember what episode, where his hearing was so acute, as is often the case with people who unfortunately can't see, their brain compensates. Like it's like a neuroplasticity thing. He could tell you the denomination of a coin by the sound it made when it hit the floor.
That's wild.
Like, yeah, and it was like a party trick he would do as a little kid. Be like, okay, well, that one's a dime, and then a family member would drop another one and be like, that's a quarter.
Yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, we didn't really talk too much about this, but, there are tracks on here where he plays everything. He plays drums, he plays keyboard bass, he plays all the other keys, obviously all the singing. He's a better bass player with his left hand than 90% of the world is with both of theirs. And he didn't have any special setup. I was reading, he didn't really have any special setup for drums. He learned how to play on a standard drum set. So the only problem that they ever really had was sometimes he would damage mics by hitting them. But they said he could just sit down at a standard drum set and just start ripping.
Did he really play much guitar? For some reason, I hear so much about rhythm instruments, but I
don't think he was. I don't think he was as comfortable on guitar. And I think part of his whole thing with synths was that they let him kind of get single note guitar sounds without really having to
clavichord stuff.
Yeah, without having to play guitar. Adante said, there can definitely be frustrations working with him, yet I've also never met another artist who can make you forget about these so easily. He can keep people waiting for hours or days, and then he'll show up and they'll immediately forget about it. To which Rob Arbittier added, that's a really annoying ability. He continued, he knows when he finally gets there, it'll be worth the wait, whether that's because the music is great or he's just such an engaging personality.
On that same topic, there's a great passage from that New Yorker profile from 1995 we keep mentioning. That's the way it goes, a close friend of Stevie's once said. He's late, everybody gets mad. He turns up, it doesn't matter anymore.
Despite Wonder's personal genius being as reliable as ever, his musical team was somewhat in flux. He abandoned the fruitful 4-year partnership he'd developed with the producing and engineering team Robert Margouleff and Malcolm Cecil, who we will talk more about later, and he elevated Olazabal Adante from assistant to main engineer and paired him with Gary Fishbach, who owned LA's Crystal Sound Studios, where big chunks of songs were cut. Other parts were worked on at the record plants in LA and Sausalito and the Hit Factory in New York, and apparently they tracked some stuff at Bob Marley's studio in Jamaica that has never come out. Nobody thought this project would go on as long as it did, Fishbach told Sound on Sound. Gary had made an arrangement with another group to engineer their album, and he couldn't get out of it, so during the time he did that, I worked alone with Stevie at the Hit Factory in New York for about a month and a half. Drummer Raymond Pounds told OK Player that he joined Wonder's backing band Wonderlove in spring of 1974. We were working on Songs in the Key of Life as soon as I got in the band and didn't realize it until the album was done. After the second week I became his drummer, he called me on the phone and said, I want you to come to the studio. I'm in the studio. Pounds would show up at the studio just to watch Wonder because frequently he wouldn't even end up playing on the songs. He played the drums on all his albums. He doesn't even let the drummers play on his album. Most of the bass he also plays. When I went up to the studio, he was recording. Then I started going to the studio with him. Some of the songs he would develop there, like Isn't She Lovely? We recorded a few songs that were sort of like that song, and I realized later a couple of songs that he wrote were parts of Isn't She Lovely? He would say, I take from that and I make a song out of it. He was always recording. Once I started with his band, he was recording all of the time.
Why would he call drummers at, sometimes insane hours if he, for the most part, intended to just track the drums himself.
Maybe just see if they could do it in a way that would make... It's probably the same reason with the bass. I mean, he would write the bass lines and then bring Nathan East in and be like, all right, if you can play this and I like that better than what I have, then we'll keep it. But I guess in most cases, he liked his own drumming better. If you wanted to play in a song, you had to hang around, Pounds continued. He'd create a song and I'd say, hey, Stevie, can I play on this one? Sometimes he would say yes. Most times he'd say no. I'm going to play on it because I know exactly what I want.
But thanks for coming.
Yeah. There was 21 songs on this album. I'm only on 3. I had to beg because we were recording for 3.5 years before that album was finished. Every time he would write a song, we would record it and finish it. I played on a lot of songs. Then we'd come to the studio the next night and he'd go, check this out. I wrote this song. It's going to replace so-and-so. All those good songs I'm playing on, and they kept getting bumped off the album. Frustrating.
Well, with Stevie's sleep schedule not dictated by sunlight, he would work for up to 48 hours on end. And Cimbello said it could sometimes be as much as 3 or 4 days. Keyboard, I can never say his name, Greg Philanges?
Philanganes? Philanganes? I don't know.
He's very famous.
Yeah.
I should know how to say his name. I feel bad. But session keyboardist, legendary session keyboardist, I should say, Greg Philanganes said, there are sessions and then there's Stevie time. We didn't have formal sessions. We went to the studio and that was just where you were. And Stevie had a mantra around this time. If my flow is going, I keep on until I peak. And everyone seemingly associated with these sessions has a story about Stevie's otherworldly schedule. Gary Bird had a particularly stressful experience when he was co-writing the lyrics to the track Village Ghetto Land. He told Stevie's biographer Mark Rabowski, we wrote that song in New York. Then he went to LA and I didn't speak to him for 3 months. Then suddenly he calls at 2 a.m. Stevie has no idea about time or time zones, and he never sleeps. And he says, hey, I got to add a new verse. I'm in the studio. Call you back in 10 minutes. Now that was pressure.
Good Lord. Bassist Nathan Watts told Rabowski for the Stevie bio, I had just gotten home and into bed exhausted when Stevie called and said, I need you to come back. I've got this bad song. He had written an 8th note keyboard bass line, and when I did it on the bass guitar, Stevie liked it because he said it sounded angry. Well, yeah, you bet it sounded angry because it was 3 a.m. and I had to come all the way back to the studio. In his interview with OK Player, Nathan Watts elaborates, saying, I Wish was a song that we never rehearsed. He wrote the song in one day. I was there with him the whole day, and we did nothing that day. I was there until 1 o'clock in the morning, and I told Stevie I was leaving because I was tired. He told me to go ahead and head home. He called me back at 3:30 in the morning and told me to come back to the studio. He said, I got a song and it's going to be good. You got to hear it. You have to play on it. I finished my part at 5 o'clock in the morning and went back home. That might not even be the craziest bass part on the record. Sir Duke, which as written, does not have a note that was frettable on whatever bass that Nathan Watts was playing. So he had to hit the highest note available to him and then bend up a half step, which is no joke on a bass guitar. I think it's the high note.
Yeah.
And you can hear it kind of not fret out, but you can hear it sound like a little bit of a squeeze. So it's just wild that he had you don't really do bends on bass unless you're, especially with like an R&B bass setup where you're playing big heavy strings. Watts was one of the newest additions to the band at this point. He'd only been playing bass. I think he'd been playing bass for like 2 years when Stevie hired him. Easy Going Evening, My Mama's Call, that song, that was the first time he ever played upright bass. He learned it just to record that song.
How did he get, well, A, that good, and B,
he was playing a James Jamerson song for at his audition, and then I guess Stevie sprung contusion on him. It was like, that was how Stevie went through a boatload of bass players trying to find a new one for Wonder Love, and he auditioned Nathan Watts and ran through some old songs of his, and then he made him try and play, follow him on Contusion, and Nathan Watts said that he only got through it by watching Stevie's left hand and trying to catch his left hand as he played all that stuff, which is just insane. Michael Cimbello said, for Sir Duke, we would basically sleep at the studio most of the time. I remember falling asleep in the vocal booth, and I knew I had to do my guitar part in the song. I would wake up every few minutes and ask, is it time yet? They would tell me no. 2 days went by, and it was like 6 a.m., and Stevie said, it's time. It was a fun environment, though. It was a busy environment. Drummer Raymond Pounds told OK Player, the studio was blocked out and everybody heard that Stevie Wonder was working on his album, so everybody came there. Barry Gordy dropped by to see what was going on. Diana Ross, Carole King, Andy Williams, Alex Haley, author of Roots, Donna Summer, and Rick James used to come by before he got hits. Rick was a determined guy who acted like a star before he was a star. He used to come by the studio in a limousine because at that time in Los Angeles, anybody could rent a limousine for $25 an hour with a 5-hour minimum. He did that 3 or 4 times, and then later, Rick James got a hit.
Oh, Rick James in the 60s was in that band with Neil Young.
The Minor Birds.
And then he got, I think, arrested for going AWOL?
Yep. From the Navy or Coast Guard?
Navy, I think. Yeah.
Between 120 and 130 people worked on Songs in the Key of Life. Some of the biggest names are jazz luminaries like Herbie Hancock, George Benson, Sneaky Pete Kleinow, my favorite LA session pedal steel vet. Guy was in Flying Burrito Brothers and the Byrds. Also throughout this time was pioneering the art of stop motion animation. I've told you this before.
Yeah, you have, and I forget. What was this for, like, The Point or something?
Gumby. He composed the Gumby theme song and was and did work on Outer Limits, Davy and Goliath.
The song or the show?
The show. Worked on
wow.
Gumby and David and Goliath, doing all this stop motion animation for them, while also cutting pedal steel on some of the most iconic records of the time. So he's on there. Raymond Pounds maintains that Alice friggin' Coltrane was brought in to play harp on this.
I can't believe that.
I don't know if they knew each other. This is the only place that I saw this mentioned. People, we have him to take his word on it. She was from Detroit. They would have been known quantities to each other. Stevie listened to John Coltrane, so he would have known who Alice was. But he told OK Player that when she showed up to play harp on "If It's Magic," which is the song that has harp. It's just harp and voice on the record. And she showed up with her harp, and Raymond Pound said, Stevie kept trying to tell her how he wanted her to play, and she said, well, this is the way I hear it. This is what I feel. But Stevie, if he called you in to perform on his record and it wasn't working out, he won't argue with you and say, I'm the producer, you need to do this. He'd just say, okay. He let Alice play, and then he told her, great, thank you. Raymond Pounds pitched another black female harpist who is cutting jazz records at this time, probably the only other one, woman named Dorothy Ashby, whose records are great. You should check out her stuff. She came in, and she is the one who plays on that song.
There's a really good version. I heard it, I think, first on the Classic Albums documentary, and I think it's floating around on YouTube or something of If It's Magic without harp, but instead of harp, it's Stevie playing a grand piano. Oh. And it's really beautiful, yeah.
Like the time that always tells, it holds the key to every heart throughout the universe. It fills you up without...
Among the other people who contributed, Lovin' You, vocalist Minnie Riperton, whistle register queen.
Maya Rudolph's dad.
Yeah.
Or mom, I mean.
A guitarist named W.G. Snuffy Walden, who would go on to win an Emmy for writing the theme song to The West Wing. And Bob Dylan's secret second wife, Carolyn Dennis. Friend of the pod, Bob Dylan's secret second wife.
It's like a Daily Mail headline.
Well, this is the woman he was married to and had a child with, and nobody knew until there was a Dylan biography that came out, and the biographer had uncovered it.
Oh my God.
They have since divorced. One guest spot that didn't happen, according to Gary Dante Olzabal, he says Frank Zappa was brought in to contribute guitar for All Day Sucker. I went to Frank Zappa, who I had a relationship with, because I had worked with him on a few things. I liked Frank, and we tried it. He was amazing, but it was one punch that he couldn't replay what was on the track. It just really wasn't as great as we'd hoped it would be. So Frank Zappa is thanked in the liner notes to Songs in the Key of Life, which is something that has baffled people for years. When I was researching this, there's all these like Steve Hoffman forums and like Reddit forums where people were like, why is Frank Zappa thanked in the liner notes for Songs in the Key of Life? And a bunch of people were like, well, maybe he loaned Stevie like keyboards or equipment or whatever. Maybe they, it is because he came into play and his contributions were canned.
Another fun set of guests were the Hare Krishnas.
Friend
They
of the
sing-
pod.
Yeah. They sing on the end, I believe, of Pastime Paradise. John Fishbach told Sound on Sound, Gary Adante rounded them up on a Hollywood Boulevard. We decided it would be great to have them on the song, so we went and talked to a bunch of those people and made arrangements for them to come to the studio. Gary Adante picks up the story. Crystal Studios was located on the east side of Hollywood, and they walked in a line all the way from the Self-Realization Fellowship, which I believe is a decent distance away. There must have been about 100 of them, chanting and praying as they showed up to perform on the song. But Stevie never showed up. We didn't know what to do, so we just let them go into the studio. The main room was not very live sounding, but it was very big. Well, they were in there for hours chanting. They didn't really interact much in any other way. And when Stevie didn't appear, we knew they'd have to walk all the way back and return another day. There was not a lot of hostility, except from us. It wasn't easy to listen to that chanting for hours on end. And I guess the Hare Krishnas weren't the only choir on that track. There was also the West Angeles Church of God choir that sings on the outro of Pastime Paradise as well.
No word on whether or not they also walked there from their church. Two other prominent guests on the record making it a family affair. Wonder's first daughter, Aisha Morris, who can be heard on Isn't She Lovely, frolicking in a bath. They recorded at their home in New York. So cute. The baby heard at the beginning of the song, though, is not Aisha.
Yeah, apparently it's the sound of a baby being born that Stevie got from a doctor friend.
He called him at 3:30 in the morning. He was like, I need the sound of a baby being born. Run it down to the studio.
You want the sound of a baby being born, dude? I can get you the sound of a baby being born, dude. Cute story about this song. It was performed in 2015 by Neo at one of those all-star Grammy salute tribute concert things. And he was joined midway through by Aisha Morris, surprising Stevie, who didn't expect to hear his daughter's voice that night. So that was cute.
I Wish is also a family affair. That's maybe my favorite song on this. I Wish. That song goes so hard. It pisses me off to no end.
Say even after Will Smith?
Yes, that I heard Wild Wild West before I heard I Wish. Oh. So now it's just inextricably like in my brainstem before this version of the song, the original version of the song. One of the many reasons I'll never forgive Will Smith.
You can't Eternal Sunshine that and just like...
Maybe with enough alcohol. That's Wonder's sister Renee Hardaway delivering the punched-in line, "You nasty boy."
I'm going to splice that out and use that as the sound whenever you text me. I love the reason that he wrote, or I guess rewrote, I Wish. It was reportedly the last song completed for Songs in the Key of Life. Originally, its lyrics dealt with war and, to quote him, cosmic spiritual stuff, including the Eastern religious concept of the Wheel of 84. Google it. Then Stevie attended the Motown Company picnic, which is adorable. It was chock full of contests and games. And, Motown had basically been Stevie's grammar school. He was a child star. And this fun afternoon triggered a whole wave of nostalgia, and it came out in this song, I Wish. And he later said, I had such a great time at the picnic that I went to Crystal Recording Studios right afterward, and the vibe came right into my mind. And there's also the track on the Songs in the Key of Life bonus EP, Saturn. And that also began as sort of a fond look backwards for Stevie. The lyrical location was originally Saginaw, which was Stevie's Michigan birthplace, and so the song was intended to be an homage to his hometown, sort of in the mold of the Jackson 5s going back to Indiana. But the song was shifted into outer space when Mike Sambello, the session guitarist, misheard the title as Saturn. And it kind of works because much like the past, Saturn is described as this idealized utopia just out of reach. So in a way, it kind of is, it comes from the same emotionally authentic place.
I hate that song. That's my least favorite song on this record. On Saturn, people live to be 205 years old. What?
I know. Traces of Stevie's family and personal history really can be found all over the album. In addition to the family members we mentioned earlier, Stevie's brother Calvin Hardaway, who I think is the one we talked about earlier, who had
training to be an accountant for 30 years.
Co-wrote Have a Talk with God. And also Stevie's former wife, Sarita Wright, provides the backing vocals on Ordinary Pain. That's a great song.
That song's incredible.
Yeah. We don't really talk enough about Knocks Me Off My Feet. I don't think there's any anecdotes we have about that song, but that song rules.
Let me see if it's in the OK Player thing.
Oh, no, I wasn't trying to make it work for you. I just want to say that song rules.
It's a good song. Let's see. The cover, the art for this is Stevie in his cowboy outfit. I always wonder does he tell people how to dress him?
I don't know. I was wondering that. Like, because you see his style change so abruptly from the 60s to the 70s.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And do people they described the clothes to him and then...
It's so nuanced, though. I mean, maybe he just has people that he trusts to be like, make me look cool. And then conceptually, when he started getting into like dashikis and braids, it was like, no, this is more authentic to the place that we are, from historically and ancestrally. And maybe he just thought that was really cool. It was like, yeah, I want to embrace that.
And then he's like, and then I want to be a cowboy.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Songs is, in a really touching way, equally... I wrote haunted, but I want to say informed by or visited. Haunted seems too negative. Infused by, but all the people that Stevie was influenced by. Gary and Dante told OK Player that a few days before Stevie was going to record the vocal for Love's in Need of Love Today, Jackie Wilson, who is, one of the most iconic soul singers of the 60s, had collapsed on stage. And Gary continues that Jackie was in the hospital. Stevie was really super emotional because he thought that Jackie wasn't going to come out of it. Stevie would sing a line or so, and we had to stop recording and turn off the mic several times just to get through it because he would get over emotional and couldn't carry on. I will always remember that. It wasn't anxiety, it was just hard to witness. That's the kind of thing you don't forget. Stevie kept saying, I've gotten all these Grammys, I've gotten all these accolades, and Jackie Wilson never got any of that. He felt like it was this guy who was obviously somebody that Stevie looked up to and emulated possibly, that never received the respect that he deserved.
Yeah, that was a really sad situation for Jackie Wilson. He collapsed on stage after suffering a massive heart attack right in the middle of the song, Lonely Teardrops. And he fell to the floor just after singing the line, My Heart is Crying. And the crowd went nuts because they thought it was part of the act.
Yeah.
And he was incapacitated for the rest of his life. And I think he died very young. I think he died in 1984. And for a time, his medical bills were covered by Elvis Presley. I don't really know what their connection was, but I guess Jackie Wilson used to always drink a lot of water and take salt tablets before going on stage because it made him sweat profusely. And he told Elvis, the ladies love the sweat. Maybe I don't know if that had anything to do with high sodium makes your blood pressure spike. I don't know if that had something to do with it or not, but yeah.
Well, we mentioned earlier the joyful tribute to jazz icon Duke Ellington, Sir Duke. Ellington died in May of 1974, and he had been an early musical role model to Stevie, but the pair never had an opportunity to work together. Stevie said, I knew the title from the beginning, but I wanted it to be about the musicians who did something for us. So soon, they are forgotten, and I wanted to show my appreciation. He name-checks Count Basie, Glenn Miller, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, although Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald were still alive at the time. And some believe that Ebony Eyes, with its lyrical reference to a Miss Beautiful Supreme, is an ode to Wonder's childhood infatuation with his Motown label mate Diana Ross, who is a few years older than him. I had a crush on her, he admitted to Vanity Fair in 2008. When I came to Motown, she walked me around the building and she showed me different things. She was wonderful. But there's also this theory that the tune is actually a tribute to another Supreme, Florence Ballard, who had died in February 1976 of cardiac arrest at the age of 32. She had been fired from the trio 9 years earlier for erratic behavior stemming from substance abuse and her resentment over being usurped by Diana Ross as the band's frontwoman. It was actually Florence Ballard that came up with the name Supremes.
Yeah, I think the original name was the Primettes.
Yeah, and her career never recovered. She was dragged down by lawsuits, domestic assault incidents, poverty, alcoholism. And Wonder would have been as acquainted with Florence Ballard as he had with Diana Ross, and her death recent enough, to wear on his mind, and memorializing her in the song and placing her in the lineage of the other black artists that he mentions on the record would have been a very Stevie thing to do.
Yeah, he's writing songs about all aspects of life, including death.
Found a lot of really interesting stuff about Stevie's keyboard style researching this episode. A lot of his songs, especially on this record, are written in keys that make extensive use of the black keys on the piano. G flat, E flat minor, B major, D flat major. We've talked a little bit before about the pentatonic scale, which is the basic 5-note organizational melodic grouping that is common to pretty much every culture across the world. But the black keys on the piano, starting with the F sharp and / G flat key, form a major pentatonic scale. So a lot of blues gospel music is written in those keys. There's a lot of gospels, like if you watch a lot of gospel piano tutorials, as I have, those guys play an F sharp a lot. And another reason that those kinds of music are written with that is because you can gliss, you can hammer down from the black keys to the white keys to kind of mimic like the bends that you would get on blues guitar. And it's not quite as easy to do that going up from a white key to a black key. So there's different physical things that play into that. And the glissandos that you can do, the kind of dragging your fingers up the keys, work differently in key signatures that are heavily feature the black keys. So that's another thing that goes into it. And for a blind person like Stevie, you can navigate those keys more easily by touch because they are raised. And I read a really interesting comparison about him and Ray Charles. Ray Charles had started playing music when he was 3 and didn't fully lose his sight until he was 7. And so he could read Braille sheet music. He had been taught to read Braille sheet music and would have to read it with one hand. He would read it with his right hand and learn the left-hand part of the piano piece, and then switch over and read with his left hand and learn the right-hand part of the piece. But it was so labor-intensive that he preferred to learn by ear and memorize all of his songs. And Stevie had been blind from birth, so he learned pretty much by touch and feel and ears. And so the contrasting thing with this is that stuff like country music and other pop pianists don't focus as much on those keys. Elton John, by example, some of his songs like Tiny Dancer, I guess that's why they call it the blues, Saturday Night's All Right, Daniel, those are all in C major, which are the entirety, the key signature that uses only the white keys. Crocodile Rock, Benny and the Jets, those are in G major, which only has one black key in it, the F sharp. Funnily enough, Irving Berlin, though, is famous enough for only playing the black keys of his piano to the point that he had a transposing piano built so he could always play in the key of F sharp.
That's insane to me. I was looking that up trying to see. So what is it? Is it just that, like, if you play what looks like a middle C note on the piano, it's actually the sound that it's making is an F sharp? Is it
I
like
think
that,
I didn't look into it as
Okay.
much as you did. I mean, it's funny. It's interesting because if you do sit at a piano, and you're just playing the black keys, like you can kind of start to sound like you're playing, melodies pretty easily because that's just the pentatonic scale. That's the way that's kind of arranged. Curtis Mayfield, who also grew up kind of singing in church, and even though he was primarily a guitar player, he actually tuned his guitar to mimic the F sharp major pentatonic scale, which was pretty unusual in as far as being the soul kind of R&B guitar. You mostly hear open tuned guitars in like rural blues or electric blues. You don't really hear, like, a lot of the Motown stuff is in standard tuning. So that's a little digression there. I don't know. That's all neat. The sneakier side, though, of Stevie's keyboard legacy is how he was involved with just decades of technological advancements in the industry. Superstition is like the most recognizable song played on a clavinet, period, right? Cripple Creek is maybe number 2.
Yeah.
But he told a website called Cron.com that the clavinet was my electric guitar. There would have been no other way to get that sound. No other synthesizer had that snap. Other synthesizers are more accessible and not as difficult to keep in tune, but you can bend the notes on them. You can't bend them on a clavinet. Nothing is as raw sounding as a real clavinet. And the reason that instrument sounds the way that it does is because their keys are hammering strings. With like an electric piano, they're hammering tines. And obviously on a grand piano, they're hammering, 8 feet of strings in some cases. But on a clavinet, they are hammering shorter strings, and those vibrations are picked up by a pickup that works the same way to an electric guitar. So you get that really bitey, insistent attack. And then the other half of all of this is Stevie's interest in synthesizers and keyboard technology. A big part of that early side of his 70s sound was a device called Tonto, which is an acronym for the Original New Timbral Orchestra. And this device was the brainchild of the engineers who we mentioned at the top of the episode, Robert Margouleff and Malcolm Cecil. Tonto began in 1968 when Margouleff bought a Moog, one of the first complete systems that Moog was marketing as a synth.
You know who's one of the first people to buy a Moog? Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees.
Yeah, Stevie was really interested in keyboard sounds. I mean, there's a whole thing where he showed up at Wendy Carlos's place in New York after Switched on Bach came out, wanted to talk to her about synth sounds. And so Margouleff met Malcolm Cecil, who is a bassist in London. I mean, he had been a co-founder of the Blues Incorporated, which is one of the big sort of finishing schools for young London blues musicians. Jack Bruce is in there, Charlie Watts, Ginger Baker. And Malcolm Cecil had also been the principal bassist for the BBC's radio orchestra. But he moved to New York. That's where he met Margouleff. And the two of them embarked on this Tonto project where they were going to create all the sounds of an orchestra with synthesizers. And they basically incorporated modules from other synth companies like Oberheim, Moog, ARP, EMS, and just stuff that they designed and controlled all of these with a computer that Cecil designed himself to basically get all of these synth modules to work in tandem. This thing was the size of a room. And they put together a recording project called Tonto's Expanding Headband and released a record called Zero Time, which got reviews in Rolling Stone and came to the attention of Stevie Wonder. Stevie is also one of the first people to own the Fairlight CMI in 1979, which is one of the early samplers.
I mean, you mentioned Wendy Carlos a moment ago. I'm guessing she was probably a big inspiration for Pastime Paradise because that borrows the first, I think, 8 notes from Johann Sebastian Bach's Prelude No. 2 in C minor.
Right.
Although I guess Stevie said he wanted it to be like a really spiky string figure, kind of like Eleanor Rigby.
Cecil. I'm sorry, dude. I don't know your name.
Why? Oh,
I'm talking to him, not you. I know your name. Is it Cecil?
I think in England it's Cecil. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Malcolm was apparently said that Stevie was apparently quite taken by the idea that this was a keyboard instrument that he could possibly play that made all of these sounds. He told the BBC in a 2010 interview. He was tired of having to play his songs to an arranger who would then go away and write the arrangement, record the track with the band, call Stevie in after it was recorded, tell him where he had to sing, what he had to sing, and then send him away while they did the mix. And Stevie said it sounded nothing like what the sound sounded like in his head. Stevie told A&E's Biography, the reason I got involved with the synthesizer was because I had ideas in my head and I wanted those ideas to be heard. And I could have Bob and Malcolm and various programmers that I worked with kind of create the sound that I wanted to hear in my head. So their first collaboration on Music of My Mind, Stevie plays everything except for guitar and trombone through this Tonto system. But sadly, even as their creative partnership continued with Talking Book, Intervisions, and Fulfilling This' first finale, Cecil and Margouleff were kind of written out of it. They never got thanked at the Grammys. They were essentially co-producers on these records, but they really only got thanked for their synthesizer contributions in the liner notes. And perhaps even most tragically, on the in Hrabowski's book, Malcolm recalls, on the very first day, and I'll never forget this, Stevie told us, I want you to be directors of my company. Oh, and I also want you to get a point on my records. And obviously that never happened. The relationship between the three of them soured during the sessions for Fulfilling This' first finale. And so by the time they get to working on Songs in the Key of Life, or by the time Stevie gets to working on Songs in the Key of Life, sans them, he needed a new keyboard toy.
And what a toy it was. This toy was a state-of-the-art analog synthesizer called the Yamaha GX1. And please, everybody, pause this, go Google it. It is quite a sight. The enormous instrument boasted 3 keyboards, multi-octave foot pedals, a ribbon controller, a whole galaxy of buttons to recall sounds and modulate pitches, and there was even a built-in bench. Greg Phillincheese later said, with only slight hyperbole, it could house a family of 8. It was huge. It's very impressive. The Yamaha GX1 was retailing at the time in the mid-70s for $60,000 or $320,000 adjusted for inflation. It was intended basically as a prototype for more consumer-oriented synthesizers, so only a handful of these were ever made, let alone sold. One of these synthesizers landed in the hands of Keith Emerson from Emerson, Lake and Palmer, enemy of the pod, Keith Emerson, Led Zeppelin's John Paul Jones, ABBA composer Benny Andersson. Stevie Wonder bought 2. One in New York, one in LA. I don't know. The GX1 had a lot to recommend itself to Stevie. It had realistic, for the time at least, instrument samples, which allowed him to single-handedly layer complex orchestral beds. And unlike other synthesizers available at that time, it was polyphonic, which meant that you could play multiple keys on the keyboard at once. Most of the synths at the time were monophonic, so you could just only play one key. So we could create these lush backing tracks in a fraction of the time. It'd be annoying to harmonize just going one note at a time. Mm-hmm. Stevie dubbed this machine the Dream Machine and promptly put it to use on many of the album's tracks. Its sound is probably most recognizable in the opening of Village Ghetto Land and the opening of Pastime Paradise. I have a question for you.
Go on.
I find it interesting that Stevie, since I think 1995, has only released 2 albums, one in 95, I believe, and one in 2005. It's just sad to me that at the time when MIDI technologies basically caught up, and I think he could make these orchestral arrangements on a synthesizer keyboard that sounds almost indistinguishable from a real orchestra, for the most part. It's just interesting to me that by the time technology caught up to the kind of stuff that he wanted to do, he doesn't seem as interested in actually doing it. I know you probably don't have the answer to that, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's this era of technology is interesting because it was so cutting edge at the time, but it's
now it sounds distinctive for what it's not.
Exactly, and those are the sounds that people are nostalgic for, know,
right.
and like the kind of jankiness of these like early string synths, like the ARP and the Selena, like these weird Russian, string synths that are like Joy Division used. Like that's what people want to hear now. I mean, you've certainly heard programmed everything on a pop track by this point, and it sounds so good that people don't even, they're like, okay, whatever. Now people want to hear like, stuff that sounds a little chintzy, and analog synths are super hot again. So I don't know. I don't know if Stevie's like hip to that or he just doesn't care. I mean, he's also old. Like, let him live. Although he did he released 2 songs in
did he?
2020.
It is interesting to me to think, because these sounds are so distinctive to our ears now that we forget that they were meant to be emulators. They were meant to approximate real instruments. I always think of them now as a stylistic choice of, you use a synth because you want it to sound spacey and all that. It's like, oh no, they just wanted to be able to orchestrate and arrange on their own. I mean, Brian Wilson used one during kind of one of his most reclusive periods in 77, 78 for that album, Beach Boys Love You. And it was kind of for the same reason. Yeah, he just wanted to create these lush sounds in his head that he would have made 10 years earlier at Gold Star Studios with the Wrecking Crew, and now he just wanted to do it alone, and that was how you did it. I kind of forget that. I think a lot of people forget that too, that these weird synthy sounds weren't a stylistic choice. They were just trying to approximate what you would do that would take 10 times the time and 100 times the money in a recording studio.
Yeah, maybe he's working on stuff with Billy Joel.
Oh my God, I would die.
He says there's an album. This was in 2020. He put out 2 songs on Republic Records.
I guess
his first non-Motown release. But at the bottom of this article, it mentions a long in gestation album, Through the Eyes of Wonder. And he also has another album in progress, a gospel record called Gospel Inspired by Lula, which is who is his mother. So,
I like. Oh, wow, that'd be cool.
maybe we hear it. Where were we? Talking about synths? Man, I love talking about synths. On Village Ghetto Land, Stevie played all of the instruments, Nathan Watts told OK Player. Many people didn't realize that there were no strings on the song. They were actually synthesizing the strings from the Yamaha keyboard. We recorded the Dream Machine as if it were an actual string section, with Stevie playing the cello part, the violas, and so on, Adante told Sound on Sound. It had these monolithic speaker cabinets, and we would tilt them toward the ceiling and place overhead mics far away, capturing it as though it were a stringed instrument. We combined this with DI for some presence, but basically we tried to treat it as an instrument in its own right. Sometime later, he continued, we were at the record plant up in Sausalito, and we played the song for a legendary recording artist whose name I won't mention because I don't want to embarrass him. He asked Stevie where we did the strings, and Stevie replied that we'd used the London Philharmonic. This guy believed him, and Stevie and I were giggling because we'd put one over on him until eventually he was figuring out what was happening and left the studio, never to be seen again. I still feel embarrassed about that.
So in other words, you could say there were no strings attached?
Hey-o!
Who do we think it was?
Oh, gosh. Record plant, Sausalito, 1975. There's a Nils Lofgren live album from.
What if it was Sly Stone?
It wouldn't have been
whole.
wouldn't have been that easy to pull one over on Sly. Tell you that much. True. Man, could have been Santana around this time. Could have been Journey. Oh, that's funny. Well, if you or a loved one know who was fooled by the astoundingly lifelike strings on the Yamaha GX7 in 1975, please get in touch with Too Much Information, and Jordan will Venmo you $5. As early as mid-1975, Stevie had assured Motown brass that Songs in the Key of Life would be ready in weeks. He might have even thought that was true. At the time, he had paid between $50,000 and $75,000 for a 60 by 270-foot billboard occupying a full block in Times Square, reading Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life, with his face on it.
It was there for 4 months. It looks amazing. Look it up. It's crazy.
Advance orders for the album began pouring in to the tune of 1.5 million copies, so that it would have shipped platinum. But as the projected release dates came and went, pressure mounted.
It's just, I just love that 1.5 million units were sold for a record that didn't technically exist. Yeah, I think the original date was projected to be Halloween 1975, and it was ultimately released on September 28th, 1976. So 11 months late, which for Stevie time, it's not that bad. There's an anecdote, again, I keep citing this New Yorker profile, but this is just too good. Stevie called his manager 30 minutes before he was due on stage in Seattle just to let him know that he was leaving his home in Los Angeles.
That's incredible.
That's really stressful.
Stevie used to take a long time doing things because he was on his own flow. And that's hard to
blind.
And that's hard to do when there were a bunch of executives coming in every few days asking you questions, Michael Cimbello told OK Player. The people who had the money to pay for the process were horrendous back then. They were saying, we don't hear a Superstition type record in that bunch. They almost made him seem like he was some kind of a jingle writer. People don't realize that's what's behind every great artist is putting up with the incompetent people who were paying for everything. Gary and Dante added, of course, there were a lot of visits from the Motown brass at the time. Stevie's attorney would corner John Fishbach and I to try and hurry things along. My response was always like, I can't sing. I can only put up the microphone. And when he gets here, I'll record it. But I can't hurry this process because I'm not the artist. I can only make it as easy, simple, and as expedient as I can. Motown took the credit, but I made the t-shirts that said, we're almost finished. Then I made ones later that said, let's mix Contusion again. He said they mixed it 30 times. That song went through 30 mixes. I was just doing it because I thought it'd be funny. I would make them for me, John Fishbach, and the assistant engineer. Motown thought it would be a good marketing tool. I think they made a few thousand We're Almost Finished t-shirts to get people interested in it.
That's amazing. Yeah, there are pictures of Stevie wearing them too, which is great.
Naturally, this whole thing was a huge headache for Motown. Not only was Gordy constantly having to fend off and then subsequently deliver conciliatory discounts for distributors who had paid in advance for a record that was not forthcoming, the record ended up costing Motown supposedly around $1 million. And this is all money only going out, not coming in, because he hadn't delivered a single in over a year.
I just love how angry this must have made Berry Gordy.
Oh, tremendously.
Gives me such delight.
Berry Gordy's wasn't the first song he wrote Money?
It was one of the early Motown songs. Did he write that? Or
I thought he had
I know Barrett Strong wrote. Oh, you're right. He might have had a co-write
so yes,
on that.
Berry Gordy loves money. I mean, he was, Gary and Dante told Sound on Sound, we didn't mix until the final stages because there was so much material recorded, we had to get a rundown of all the songs. There was a democratic process where everyone voted for their favorite tracks, but then Stevie threw all that out and selected what he wanted anyway. Par for the course. That's why there was an EP. He couldn't even fit some of the songs onto a double album, but they were important enough that he wanted them to be included in the package. By fall of 1976, Wonder was ready. Songs in the Key of Life ended up being released as a double LP and bonus EP and made its grand debut in the pastoral paradise of Longview Farm in rural North Brookfield, Massachusetts, a property owned by Gil Markle, a music industry exec and buddy of Stevie's manager Johannan Vagoda.
This is so weird. That's like not that far from where I grew up, and I can confirm it is in the middle of nowhere. But going to North Brookfield, that was just the final destination in a long, arduous journey. The world press met in the lobby of Manhattan's elegant Essex House on September 7th, 1976 at 7:30 in the morning. There, they chomped down a quick complimentary breakfast before being ushered onto 3 buses that drove them to Kennedy International Airport, but not before getting a quick detour through Times Square where they took a peek at that massive Stevie Wonder Songs in the Key of Life billboard.
We're just going to take a quick jaunt through Times Square. That'll go well.
I mean, the traffic through there probably added like 40 minutes with these massive buses just to look at this giant billboard. Well, soon, thankfully, all of these reporters were on a chartered DC-9, well stocked with champagne and appetizers, and then the plane touched down at a small airport in Worcester, Massachusetts, where my sister was born, like 20 minutes from where I grew up, and the journalists were then loaded onto a fleet of school buses for a short ride to the listening party. And Longview Farm, it is a 143-acre equestrian ground that had recently been renovated to include a world-class recording studio, which had been used by the Rolling Stones, Cat Stevens, Aerosmith, and the Jay Giles Band, also a New England-based band, among many others. And guests were treated to hearty meals of roast beef, pie, and presumably lots of champagne while waiting for Stevie to make his grand entrance. And he arrived resplendent in a gaudy cowboy getup, complete with a 10-gallon hat, leather fringe, and a gun holster emblazoned with the words, "Number 1 with a bullet." That's pretty funny. And then he announced, "Let's pop what's poppin'," as he hit play on the reel-to-reel tape machine, unleashing the music that had been gestating in the studio for so long. This gala alone cost Motown $30,000.
Well, his cowboy outfit was correct. Released finally on September 28th, 1976, Songs in the Key of Life debuted atop the Billboard 200 album chart, remained there for a record-breaking 14 weeks, and went on to sell more than 10 million units in the U.S. alone, earning an RIAA Diamond Award in 2005 for its 10 times platinum certification. On January 15th, 1977, the album was finally knocked out of the top slot by the Eagles' Hotel California, and it fell to number 4 the following week. But on January 29th, it returned to the top for a 14th and final week. By the end of its run, it had spent 35 weeks inside the top 10 of the Billboard Albums chart and was on the chart for a total of 80 weeks. Eventually, it became the second best-selling album of 1977 in the U.S., behind only Fleetwood Mac's Rumors. At the 1977 Grammys, Songs in the Key of Life scooped up awards for Best Male Pop Vocal Performance and Album of the Year, while I Wish won for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, which Wonder accepted via satellite while he was visiting Nigeria to explore his heritage. The experience was only slightly marred by a poor connection, which prompted presenter Andy Williams to ask, "Stevie, can you see us?"
Although I feel a little better knowing that Stevie probably loved that.
Yeah, given his sense of humor. The album's legacy is apparent to anyone with ears.
Yeah.
Wonder told Q magazine in April 95, of all the albums, Songs in the Key of Life is the one I'm most happy about. Just the time, just being alive then. To be a father and then letting go and letting God give me the energy and strength that I needed. Elton,
I mean, right
okay.
on the money for what we were saying at the top of the episode.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so clear. I mean, because that's the kind of thing that an artist would say about their favorite album, and you're just
Right.
like, thanks for, Stadium Arcadium or whatever. But sorry, I didn't mean it, Andrew. But yeah, I mean, that's just you can just get that sense really comes through on this record.
I didn't know this, but Elton John, this is his
Loves it.
favorite album and carries a copy of it wherever he travels in the world.
That seems excessive. That worries me a bit. Maybe that was pre-iPods, pre-Spotify,
On what, 8-track? What do you think he
It's
brings
like-
it around on?
reel to reel,
Yeah. It was
security vinyl.
It was Michael Jackson's favorite Stevie Wonder record. George Michael called it his favorite of all time, while Kanye West, Mariah Carey, and Whitney Houston of all name-dropped it at points. Pastime Paradise, of course, served as the sample for Coolio's Gangsta Paradise in 1995, and then subsequently Weird Al's parody of that, Amish Paradise.
The first version of Gangsta's Paradise didn't meet with Stevie Wonder's approval because it contained curse words, which I find adorable.
And of course, who could forget Will Smith reworking I Wish into Wild Wild West, one of the worst songs of his career, and the soundtrack to a movie that permanently dented his reputation as an invincible box office draw, and wrecked Barry Sonnenfeld's career.
Yes.
That song, man, he f***ing uses, he how dare he? He uses the lyrics to that song. He's talking about Kenneth Branagh's villain. He says he's stressing or stepping, and he says the phrase, "Now I must put his behind to the test." What the was he huffing in 98 or whatever that was, that he felt that he could get away with that over a Stevie Wonder sample, one of the greatest Stevie Wonder songs? How dare he? My God, that just makes me so angry. Despite some of the personal inconveniences to the musicians that went into the making of the album, and apparently anyone in Stevie's orbit around this time, including Italian television and no, I'm just kidding. We mentioned that we went a long rant about this earlier. It's hard to think of any word around Stevie and Songs in the Key of Life other than joy. If you ascribe to the axiom that you stop maturing at the age that you become famous, then Stevie Wonder is still, in many respects, just a prodigiously talented 11-year-old boy with a big heart and a deep, abiding love of music. And that innocence and love shines through even the darker aspects of Songs in the Key of Life. There's a great profile of him from 1995 in The New Yorker. And someone is describing the earthquake that had just happened in Osaka, Japan, to Stevie backstage. The writer of the piece asks if he had any friends living there. And Stevie replies, "Well, I know some people in Osaka. Everyone's my friend." And that is just the most heartwarming, crushing. It makes my heart grow 3 sizes, as does this album. And so I hope we've been able to instill a little bit more of that love and share a little bit more of that with all of you.
I'm so glad you used that line, because that really stuck out to me in that piece too. And I wrote my little bit in the intro, really underscoring the word joy, having not read this far to see that it was your outro. And I think that just goes to show. I mean, it was the first word that came to mind for both of us in a really authentic way.
Yeah.
Beautiful soul, beautiful record.
If you need a shot of pure, undiluted joy in your life, slap on Songs in the Key of Life at 3 a.m, as Stevie Wonder intended it for it to be heard. Folks, thank you for listening. This has been Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.